In my home, my parents worked a lot. My mom was going to nursing school when I was in young elementary school. So most of my memories are of doing homework and reading at the dining room table while my mom was studying. Books were all in our house, very accessible. My older sister was a voracious reader, and she could read very fast, and I always compared myself to her. And so I did not actually consider myself a reader, or maybe I drew as a child. That was my thing. Reading was my older sister, sports was my younger sister, and I was the drawer, and I loved to draw. But I read so slowly that I didn't consider myself a very good reader, but I did love to read. Easily, my two easiest answers are Tommy DePallo and Shel Silverstein. The first book I ever remember being read to was The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein, but it wasn't until later that I discovered all his poetry in his books, and I was a huge fan of all his poems. And he was also an illustrator and author as well. He illustrated his works. And then Tommy DePallo in second grade was when I discovered that being an author and an illustrator was an actual job, from my librarian in second grade. And so I owe her helping me figure out what my big giant dream in life was. It was very cute because how it happened was I was reading Stregonona by Tommy DePallo, and I was fascinated with the illustrations, and I kept asking, where did they come from? And my librarian said, well, Tommy drew them. I said, well, where did he get that story from? She said, well, he wrote the story too. She said, that's his job. And that was a light bulb moment for me. I'm like, that's a job? That's something that you can do for a living? And that was a dream that I didn't actually speak out loud for several years. But in second grade, pretty much, I thought that was the best job in the whole wide world. To take a very big concept that, what I like to do is take a concept that has troubled me or meant something to me since a child and has followed me into adulthood, and I still struggle with the same exact inner voice as a child, and those are the concepts that I want to help children with at that age, that I wish I had had something. And so the challenge of that is sometimes to take a very, very, what we consider an adult problem, remember that it's actually it's a human problem. It's not adult or child, it's just human. And to write it in the simplest terms possible that then compel both a child and an adult. That is always my goal with most of my books. Yes, she's my girl. Yes. I was at a writer's retreat 2 years ago last week in July at Martha's Vineyard. And it was because I want to write chapter books. And so I was going there for a writer's retreat to do that. And I ended up being very intimidated by the talent that was at the retreat. And so I decided, oh, I don't know if I can do this. Like picture books, maybe that's what I do. And so I would learn, take in everything, get overwhelmed, and then I would go run around the island after the day's work was over. And I love cemeteries and graveyards. And there was a very, very old, like 200 years old cemetery right next to where we were staying. And I would walk through and I would talk out loud and say, if anybody here has a story to tell, I am a storyteller, I'm a writer. And I said, I don't know if I can make you a chapter book, but I could definitely do a picture book for you. And I was very drawn to a tombstone that had the name Cordelia on it. And it so intrigued me that I ended up going back to photograph the tombstone, and it just stuck with me. And it wasn't until October, the following October, that same year, that I heard a little whisper in my ear, and it was a little girl, and she said, my name is Cordelia, and I can fly. And all my children in my books are redheads. I am very intrigued by redheaded people and children. They show up all the time in my books. I'm not sure why, but Cordelia showed up as a little redhead like Jonathan James. How I can best explain that is that pictures and words come to me interlocking. They come, it's almost a puzzle that comes all together, and I have to sort it out. So usually the character shows up first, I hear their voice. And I don't always hear exactly what they're saying, I just know they're talking to me. And then an image will come. And for instance, I'll show this because it's right here. But this is an image that I drew. This is the first time I ever drew Cordelia. This is when she showed up and I knew what she looked like. And I drew this. I had no idea the storyline yet. And it ended up being the last page of the book, and it made sense. So my brain had already somehow processed the book without me knowing what the book was. And that tends to be how all my books work. So the character shows up, I find out usually what they look like or hear their voice for a while, and then I can write down the story, and it's putting it down, taking it away, putting it down, taking it away. And I don't really sketch the book until the last thing, but it's processing in my mind the whole time. Well, how perfect was that? So this, I do have a couple. So this is, again, the very first time I started drawing her and realized that she could fly. And I didn't realize I did this, but these are Raggedy Ann colors. And Raggedy Ann was a huge influence as a child. So you could see like just how that happened. And I went from there, and then I started doing some studies of Cordelia. And so she's kind of fleshing out. She's getting more, you know, I'm understanding who she is. Here is a very early painting, which is interesting because there's that whale tail again. And that actually, I came to find out, is Beatrice. Beatrice later, it took a year before Beatrice started talking to me. And she's a sage old whale that is friends with Cordelia. And I do think I will write that chapter book. I know I'm going to be able to do it because that book is called Beatrice. And it's basically Beatrice teaches Cordelia how she can fly. I think the very best thing you can possibly do for any dream, but particularly writing or illustrating, is to not limit yourself, to not say ever out loud, I'm not a writer, I'm not a drawer, or I'm not good at it. Just allow yourself to grow and to progress and to understand that everybody has to learn, and you don't start out good. You have to practice. And I found this is the original text when I started writing to figure out Cordelia's story, and it's terrible. I mean, it's really terrible. And I mean, it ended up like changing into a rhyming book, but I had to start somewhere, and you have to start somewhere. And there's still days that I'm drawing and I say my drawing hand doesn't work, and I just cannot draw that day. For some reason, the process isn't working, and I have to walk away from it. But I think if you don't limit yourself in any sense, then you open yourself up to so much possibility in life. And that is the most important thing, is to always be willing to accept that maybe you can instead of you can't. The power of literacy and creating a love of reading is that it is literally, I think, the key to every single dream you can have in this world. Because when you can read, you can learn anything. And knowledge is the key to figuring out whatever dream that you want to have. You read about it. If you want to write, obviously you want to be a good reader to have world experiences. It transports you, it takes you places, but it's also such a learning tool. I've had little boys come up to me and say, "Well, I want to be a professional football player, so I don't really care about being a good reader." And I say, "Well, you know what? Why don't you get out an autobiography about a football player, and you're going to learn what he did in his life to get to where he did, and you might end up being able to skip all these steps because he helped you move forward towards your goal. Had you not read that book, you wouldn't even have known that." And then when I told this little boy that, I think he was maybe a fourth grader, you just saw his eyes get wide. And the librarian ended up contacting me later on and said he has been such a reluctant reader, and I cannot keep him. I have to order more books, autobiographies for this kid, because that's all he wants to read. But now he's a reader. And you just got to find the things you love, and it opens up your whole world. So I think it's the key to every dream you can have.